Hi, I'm horror author Paul Edwards. Tonight I'm going to be watching The Creature from the Black Lagoon. I rate this movie together with Them and The Thing as one of the best science fiction horror movies of the 1950s, and there were a lot to choose from. And this video, by the way, is inspired mainly by one of my very first subscribers, Space Ishmael. So don't let it be said that I don't do requests. He mentioned that he loved the Gill Man, and here we are talking about him. And tonight we're going to talk about The Creature from the Black Lagoon and its sequels, Revenge of the Creature and The Creature Walks Among Us, and where the Gill Man has gone from there. But first, let's start with the first and best film in the series, The Creature from the Black Lagoon. 1954 was the year that this film came out, and it was filmed in 3D, and it was released in different theaters. Some had it in 3D, some had it in regular 2D. The 3D fad of the 1950s really had sort of petered out by the time this film came out. But because House of Wax, the year before, had featured 3D and been very, very successful, the studio thought they'd give a try to putting this monster movie in 3D. Their plans to sort of revive the use of 3D in movies didn't really work out, but the movie itself did work out and was very popular. So Creature from the Black Lagoon features a number of actors who were big in 1950s genre films. Richard Carlson plays the male lead, and Richard Carlson is probably best remembered as having been the male lead in It Came from Outer Space. He also played a villainous role in a ghost movie called Tormented, and he was in a lot of other genre productions. He was in Valley of the Gwangi, too, in a supporting role. Richard Denning played the other male lead. He also was an actor that became known for doing genre pictures. Probably the best that's remembered today is The Day the World Ended, Roger Corman film. And he was in some other genre films as well. Then we have Whit Bissell. Whit Bissell was sort of a character actor. He was a somewhat short, older man, and he had a very distinguished, deep voice. And he was quite good at playing professorial types. And he played the mad scientist in I Was a Teenage Frankenstein. And completely unrelated, he played the mad scientist in I Was a Teenage Werewolf. Very similar titled films, but they were not in the same continuity. And he played a different mad scientist in those two films. So between Richard Denning, Richard Carlson, and Whit Bissell, we had a lot of fairly big names for 1950s drive-in sci-fi pictures. We also had Julia Adams, who actually was probably the most successful of all of the actors that appeared in this film in her overall Hollywood career, although she was not known for doing horror pictures like these other actors were. This was, in fact, her only big horror picture. But she did have a very good career in Hollywood, starring against people like Charlton Heston. Now, when it comes to the actor who played the creature from the Black Lagoon, you actually had two, because the creature is amphibious, and scientists are exploring this lost part of the Amazon River, the Black Lagoon, where this fish man has defied evolution and has survived for millions of years. So on land, the actor who portrayed the creature was Ben Chapman. But in the underwater scenes, which there were quite a lot of, he was played by a young man named Riku Browning, who was only like 21 or 22 at the time that this was being filmed. That's going to be important in a moment. So Creature from the Black Lagoon featured quite a lot of underwater photography. the explorers get to the Black Lagoon, and Julia Adams' character foolishly decides to go swimming in the Amazon River, which I don't know why anyone would do that. But as she's swimming around down there, the creature sees her and, is fascinated by her and starts to swim parallel to her, underneath her. She's completely oblivious to this fact, but the creature is following her around and stalking her, basically, all filmed underwater. And the photography is very impressive. I mentioned that Riku Browning being so young would come up in a moment. Incredibly, Riku Browning lived until the year 2023. That's not the incredible part. The incredible part is that he was the last actor to have played a Universal Studios classic monster to have been alive. So, you think of the Universal monsters, Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi, Lon Chaney Jr. These people all died before a lot of you watching this video were even born. But the last actor to have played a Universal classic monster lived until 2023. And that's pretty impressive. Okay, so when we get to the creature from the Black Lagoon, we really have to talk about the actual design of the creature. And as you can see on a number of items behind me, on a towel, a couple of glasses, a magazine cover, Famous Monsters of Filmland from 1973, and a very good Mego action figure of the creature. This design makes an impression. This design has endured. Even people who have never seen the film and never would be interested in seeing the film know the creature from the Black Lagoon by sight. It's an excellent design. Millicent Patrick created the design for the creature from the Black Lagoon. And I'm going to show you a couple of pictures in just a moment. And I want to compare why this monster design looks so much better than a comparable monster design. Okay, so here we have the creature from the Black Lagoon as designed by Millicent Patrick. And you'll notice that the creature's anatomy looks natural. Of course, it's an otherworldly being, but it looks like if there were a fish-human hybrid, a lot of the anatomy here would make sense. Okay, the scales, the webbed fingers. Okay, it looks organic. Now, I'm going to compare this to another very similar picture of a similar type monster. This is Paul Blaisdell's design for the She Creature, which came out in 1956, the same year that the third Creature from the Black Lagoon picture came out. This is the She Creature. This scared the heck out of me when I was a little boy, when I was like 8 years old, watching Creature Double Feature on Channel 56 in Boston. This design is imposing, it's threatening. It looks like the creature has a ton of muscle and isn't going to be afraid to use it against you. But if you really take a close look, the design is sort of a mess. It's not organic. It's not natural. It looks like odds and ends piled on together to make something fearsome. And did it work? Was it scary? Yes. But if you really stop and look at it, the She Creature does not look like the product of evolution or intelligent design or anything like that. It looks like a mishmash of different pieces that don't necessarily belong together. I'm particularly against the webbed frills on the shoulder here. It just doesn't look right. So comparing this to this, I don't think there's any contest whatsoever. This design is way, way better. It looks natural. It looks believable. And that's the reason why this one is still remembered now, decades later, and the other one is not. So kudos to Millicent Patrick. Unfortunately, she did not get the credit she deserved until relatively recently. for her creature design. It's worth pointing out also the music from Creature from the Black Lagoon. If you are seeing this movie for the first time, but you recognize this music, it's because the Creature from the Black Lagoon soundtrack was reused about 9 years later when the American release of King Kong vs. Godzilla came out. The Japanese production of King Kong vs. Godzilla had all its own original music. But when they released it in America, they edited and rearranged scenes and reduced the role of some characters, increased the role of others. And one of the millions of changes they made was to slap on Creature from the Black Lagoon music all through King Kong vs. Godzilla. So if you have seen that film, but you haven't seen Creature, the music is going to sound real familiar to you. Oddly, although the music was not written for King Kong vs. Godzilla, it actually kind of works in that film. It actually does match the tone of some of the surprise scenes when either King Kong or Godzilla emerges and scares you as much as a kaiju movie can. So Creature from the Black Lagoon was quite popular, and they immediately set about making a sequel. And the following year, we got Revenge of the Creature. Now, I'm not going to spoil who lived or died in the first film, but we have a almost entirely new cast in Revenge of the Creature, the second film. And as in the first film, we had veteran 50s sci-fi actors, Richard Carlson and Richard Denning and Whit Bissell. In Revenge of the Creature, we got the king of all 50s sci-fi actors, John Agar. John Agar was in so many science fiction pictures in the 50s and 60s, I'm not even going to try to list them. You can Google them. There were a lot of them. And he was asked in an interview later in life if he minded being typecast in B movies like these. And his answer was, not at all. My job as an actor is to entertain people. And if people are entertained by the kind of movies that I end up making all the time, then I couldn't be happier, which I thought was a really nice answer. John Agar is the male lead in this picture. And what happens in Revenge of the Creature is that a second expedition has gone to the Black Lagoon in order to capture the Gill Man. And this is not a spoiler. This is basic to the story. They do capture the Gill Man and they bring him to a marine park in Florida and put him on display for the general public's amusement. So once they get to Ocean Harbor, this marine park, the Gill Man is not exactly treated well. They are trying to train him with a sort of an underwater version of an electric cattle prod. They're training him by negative reinforcement to obey their orders. And the scientists do come off as maybe not exactly cruel, but unthinking is probably the best way to say it. Unthinking in their treatment of the Gill Man. And you can understand how the Gill Man feels when he's trying desperately to get out because they have him chained to the bottom of a tank. And as the story progresses and the Gill Man has finally had enough, he tugs and fights ferociously against his chains and finally breaks free. And just in that moment, even though the Gill Man is the bad guy, just in that moment, you're like, yes! It's such a visceral moment. It's so great when you see the creature break free of his chains, and now the tables are going to turn. And they're not going to be able to inflict harm on him anymore. So the creature escapes and goes on a rampage, first through the marine park, then out onto the nearby road, and they do a great shot of him turning over a parked car and tumbling it down the side of a hill. And then the creature escapes into the ocean. Here's where we start to have a problem. You can have as wild of a premise as you want, in a science fiction or horror story. A creature that evolution has forgotten, that survived for millions of years in the Amazon, okay, viewers will grant you that initial premise. Otherwise, they wouldn't see your movie in the first place. But everything that flows from that premise has to be logical. The Amazon River is freshwater. I'm not saying it's clean. I wouldn't drink it, but it is freshwater as opposed to saltwater. And if evolution has trapped the Gill Man and his kind in the Black Lagoon for millions of years, he would have had no exposure to salt water and no possible reason to have adapted to be able to survive in salt water. So when the Gill Man escapes and goes into the ocean, he should have died right away because it should have been unbreathable to him. So here's where we start to have problems in the logical inferences that should come from the creature living in the Black Lagoon for all this time. But he escapes into the ocean and he starts working his way southward, obviously trying to get back to the Amazon River. And he's working his way down the coast of Florida, terrorizing locals, beachgoers, people who just happen to be near the pier when he passes by. And he's basically on a rampage. And those scenes are really good too. Finally, what happens is the creature from the Black Lagoon, well, spoiler alert for a movie that's older than almost all of you, he doesn't make it back to the Amazon. And in fact, the final shot of him is lifted directly from the final shot of the creature in the first movie. This also brings up another question as to whether or not this is actually the same Gill Man. Again, an audience will grant you a far-out premise, but then from that premise, you have to be logical. If there is one prehistoric fishman that has survived in the Amazon basin for all this time, there has to be more than one, because one organism isn't going to survive for, millions of years. There must be a bunch of them that are reproducing and replenishing their own population as the old ones die off. And in fact, in Creature from the Black Lagoon, the whole film starts because the fossilized skeleton of a previous Gill Man is discovered, at least the hand and forearm of one. And they're, the scientists are fascinated by this webbed, five-fingered appendage, and that's why they're looking in the first place for the Gill Man. So they're not immortal. They die like any other organism. And if it is true that in the Creature from the Black Lagoon, they found one specimen, that's not to say that when they returned in Revenge of the Creature that they found the exact same Gill Man. They could have found another one. And, they probably couldn't tell the difference from one to another. And that would explain a lot, actually. Now, Revenge of the Creature is also known in Hollywood history as having been the very first film of Clint Eastwood. He plays a lab assistant, not a tough guy. He's quite young, and he only appears in one scene, and he has a couple of jokey lines of dialogue, and then he's gone. But, so there's no Dirty Harry, anything like that, but you do get Clint Eastwood for a couple of moments in this film. Now, when it comes to the sequels, I feel that this was easily the stronger of the two sequels. Probably almost as good as the original, which is saying quite a lot. Unfortunately, they couldn't keep it going at quite that level. And when they went in to do the third film, The Creature Walks Among Us, the following year, 1956, it seemed like they had sort of run out of ideas. I really feel that what they should have done was just do the same story as Revenge of the Creature again and have a Gill Man run wild through the human civilization. What they chose to do, though, was in The Creature Walks Among Us, explorers are searching for the Gill Man. They find him, but during the course of finding him, there's a terrible fire, and the Gill Man is very badly burned. So badly burned that he probably will die unless they perform a miracle operation, because it turns out that evolution has placed into the Gill Man a set of lungs, and if his gills are now too damaged to be used, they can operate and activate these latent lungs so that he can breathe air like we do. And that's, of course, exactly what the scientists do. And they drastically changed the look of the creature in performing this operation. Also, for some reason I can't even fathom, they decide that they're going to put clothing on the creature. So the creature from the Black Lagoon that we know from the first two films is really only in the first act of The Creature Walks Among Us. From that point forward, from the time of the operation forward, what has happened to the Gill Man is that he looks like a completely different monster, nowhere nearly as well designed as Millicent Patrick's Creature from the Black Lagoon design. He's wearing clothes. If you feel like you've somehow changed the channel and started watching a different old monster movie, it just doesn't match. Also, he becomes much tamer. He's in captivity, he's being held in a pen, he's being fed, and as a result of this, his behavior becomes less violent and more placid. And he's so placid that he's really not a threat to human beings until something happens which changes that. But this is out of character for the Creature from the Black Lagoon. We saw in Revenge of the Creature, he was in a tank, he was in captivity, and he was being fed. They gave him plenty of food. That wasn't a problem. And he couldn't wait to get out of there. He couldn't stand being held captive. The fact that a year later, in the next picture, he's okay with living in captivity and being kept like some sort of a advanced pet, it really doesn't make sense. And this doesn't make sense even if you follow my reasoning that it's not the same creature in each movie. Even if it's just another creature of his kind, it still doesn't make sense that he would have such a different personality and be okay with being held captive. One excellent part, though, of The Creature Walks Among Us is a line that's said early on in the film when a local is describing his terrifying encounter with the creature. And he says that this creature is smart. Not smart like man, smart like devil. That's a great line. That's the best line in the whole picture. It's just great. So The Creature Walks Among Us brought an end to the series of the Creature from the Black Lagoon films. And also, very sadly, nothing lasts forever, it brought an end to all of the classic Universal Monsters films. Most of the monsters that you think of as the Universal monsters, the Invisible Man, Frankenstein, the Mummy, Dracula, the Wolf Man, they made it to the end of the 1940s. Creature from the Black Lagoon only started after those monsters movies were all done, as far as Universal Studios was concerned. But he is considered to be one of the quote-unquote Universal monsters, classic monsters. But once his movie franchise ended in 1956, that was it. That was the end of the classic Universal Monsters film series. It wasn't necessarily the end of the creature, though, because he did pop up in the 1960s TV sitcom The Munsters, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's a comedy show about a family of monsters that live in an ordinary town, and the comedy is in how they interact with the normal townspeople, who they consider to be strange and weird. And so the Creature from the Black Lagoon did a guest spot on The Munsters. He played Uncle Gilbert, who came to visit the Munsters, but the episode he was in, he wasn't a main character in the episode. He only appeared at the very end, right at the epilogue of the story. It's the episode where Marilyn Munster is being courted by a handsome young banker who it turns out is really only just interested in her money. And at the very end, we get the visit from Uncle Gilbert. And oddly enough, even though it's the classic Creature from the Black Lagoon face and hands, webbed fingers, he is wearing clothes like the Creature Walks Among Us version of the creature. And he's talking because it's a comedy show, and he has a couple of comedic lines, and that's it. So that is as far as the actual Creature from the Black Lagoon got. Now, people have been talking about remaking Creature from the Black Lagoon for 40 years. Starting in the early 1980s, people wanted to remake the Creature from the Black Lagoon, and generally in projects that kept a similar tone to the original movie. Unfortunately, none of these projects seem to ever get off the ground. Other Universal monsters have been remade. Universal did a very good Dracula picture in 1979, and The Wolfman was remade in 2010 and then again in 2025. The Mummy had a series of films in the 90s, and then the disastrous Tom Cruise Dark Universe Mummy. So all these other monsters have been popping up, but not Creature from the Black Lagoon. People have been trying. At one point, John Carpenter was going to make a Creature from the Black Lagoon film. That never wound up happening. But all hope is not lost, because now, as I'm recording this in 2025, James Wan has announced that he is going to be directing a new Creature from the Black Lagoon film. And it sounds like the project is really going to happen this time. And if it's a James Wan film, I can already predict that it's going to be replete with jump scares. But that actually matches the Creature from the Black Lagoon fine, because people are, on board the boat or on the shore, and all of a sudden the creature jumps out of the water when you didn't know he had been lurking there. And it's a great character for a movie filled with jump scares. Also, I should point out something else. I don't want to overstate this, but if you've ever seen the late 90s horror film Anaconda, they made a bunch of these, but the first one, the one with John Voight in it, Anaconda has a lot of similarities to Creature from the Black Lagoon. The explorers going up the Amazon, being corralled into this forbidden zone, and the monster coming after them. I'm not saying that it's necessarily an intentional reflection of Creature from the Black Lagoon, but as I saw Anaconda the first time, all I could think of was, oh, this is Creature from the Black Lagoon. Not the same quality, but the same general feel, the same vibe to it. Well, listen, if you enjoy the Creature from the Black Lagoon, if you enjoy other classic movie monsters, you really are going to like my series of books, the Mourner's Woods books. They are available on Amazon.com. I have 6 of them out so far. If you particularly are interested in Creature from the Black Lagoon, I recommend you start with Mourner's Swamp, which, as you might infer, has a swamp monster in it. But you could start with any of the books. They can be read in any order. They're all independent. And they're available for 99 cents for an ebook, $9.99 paperback. Some of them are available in hardcover, and all of them are now available in audiobook. Thanks. Have a great day.